Hello everyone, welcome to the Aquashop Wasabi Aquarium channel. In this episode, we will be talking about how to create a grassland aquascape using Eleocharis acicularis mini, also known as mini hairgrass. I would say that out of the many different types of aquascapes out there, a large portion of us hobbyists have always wanted to set up a grassland aquascape once in our lives. Take myself for example. I've been keeping aquariums for over 20 years now, and the first aquascape I ever set up was a grassland aquascape using ADA's ryuo stone and dwarf hairgrass, also known as Eleocharis parvula. And so for this series, I will be going back to my roots and set up a brand new grassland aquascape like so. I will be doing all of this while guiding you, the viewer, through how to make one just like this one. Later on in the video, I will walk you through the steps I took to get from an empty aquarium to what you see right now, so keep watching. For this particular 45cm aquarium, it was actually the subject of the previous video on how to reset a planted aquarium. So if you have an aquarium you are thinking of tearing down and want some tips, please watch that video. So after that aquarium reset video, I went ahead and set up this aquascape. For the specs, this aquarium is 45cm long, 27 centimeters wide, and 30 centimeters tall. This is what many consider to be the standard 45 centimeter aquarium. Plants wise, it is very simple. I used only dwarf hairgrass and mini hairgrass to create this traditional grassland aquascape. For the hardscape, I used ADA ryuo stone, which is a stone that complements hairgrass very well. When creating a grassland aquascape, there are some common mistakes that people make and things you should avoid, so I will also be talking about those later on. For this specific video, due to time restraints, I was not able to fit everything into one video, so this video will only cover up to the initial aquascape as you see here. Later on, I will make videos on how the aquarium is doing, so please keep your eye out for those videos. Now, let's move on to the actual setup. To start, let's talk about substrate. For this layout, I chose to use ADA Amazonia version 2, which at the time of this recording is a new product that just came out from ADA. Up until the release of this new product, you may have heard of or even used the predecessor, called Amazonia 2. As this is more of a refresh rather than a new soil, there aren't too many differences from the previous version. However, the most important change is the inclusion of the Amazonia supplement, which is a stick-type fertilizer that is separate from the soil. With the previous version, you wouldn't really have any problems with plant growth if you used ADA's power sand. But for those who didn't use power sand, they complained about how slow plant growth was with Amazonia 2, which reached the ears of ADA. Those complaints are what prompted ADA to add the Amazonia supplement and to rename the product to Amazonia version 2. With this added supplement, ADA hopes that the complaints on slow growth will be a thing of the past. So my main reason for choosing Amazonia 2 is not only to see how it feels to use, but also to be one of the first to give it a proper review. So here is that previously mentioned Amazonia supplement, which is a stick-type fertilizer that comes with the new Amazonia version 2. For this aquarium, I opened a 9-liter bag of soil. However, the amount of Amazonia supplement that the 9-liter bags come with will be a bit too much for this aquarium. So by doing some simple division, I calculated that I will need about 2/3 of the Amazonia supplement for this aquarium. First, I will scatter around 2/3 of the Amazonia supplement packet in the aquarium. The key word here is around. It doesn't need to be exact. So what I am noticing right away is how small some of these sticks are. For these small pieces, it seems impossible to add later on, so don't forget to put the supplement in before you start planting. Next, I will be adding my substrate additives. For this aquarium, I will be using ADA's Clear Super and Bacter 100. Normally, I would also use ADA's Tourmaline BC, but because this is a 45cm aquarium, and because there is a high chance of me resetting this tank before the 1-year mark, I will only be using 2 additives this time. For people who are planning to keep their grassland aquascape long term, I do recommend using ADA's Tourmaline BC, because it does help in keeping the soil intact for longer. To start, I will now sprinkle the Bacter 100 evenly across the aquarium. For this 45 cm aquarium, I will be using 2 tablespoons. If you are creating a 60 cm aquarium, use 3 tablespoons. Next, I will add the clear super in the same way I did the Bacter 100. Like the Bacter 100, I will be adding 2 tablespoons to this aquarium. You want to think of Bacter 100 and clear super as a pair, as you won't see much benefit in just using one or the other. If you don't know what clear super is, it is an additive that accelerates bacteria colonization in the substrate and also has the side effect of improving plant growth when you first start your aquarium. By adding these products, it will help to create a better substrate system, which will lead to better plant growth. And that's all the prep work done that you need to do before adding the soil. This is a minor point, but if you want your aquarium to look as beautiful as possible, I would recommend pushing the Amazonia supplement away from the front glass. Now, it's time to add the soil. In this case, because I am making an iwagumi layout, I will only add an initial amount of soil first, and add more later as I need it. One tip in adding soil is to add it from the front glass first. That way you won't see any of the supplement sticks, and there will be no chance of them rolling back to the front glass. As I mentioned a moment ago, because this is an iwagumi layout, I will only add an initial amount of soil first, and then add more soil when I need it. In a past video where I set up a 60 cm iwagumi layout, I go more in depth on why I add the soil like this, so if you are curious, please check that video out on the Wasabi Aquarium channel. Now, one question I get a lot in previous videos with an adding soil part was, what's that tool you're using to add soil? The tool I'm using to add soil is a stainless steel soil scoop. Not gonna lie, it is quite pretty. Because this question was asked so much, I will put a link in the description down below to where you can buy this exact soil scoop if you want one for yourself, so check it out. Next, I will be putting the stones in, but before that, we need to make a decision with the soil. Because this is a 45 cm aquarium, it is extremely difficult to create visually stunning, depth-producing slope effects with the soil due to the physical limitations of the aquarium. In my 60 cm iwagumi aquarium video, I chose to create a more advanced iwagumi scape using some sloping techniques, and because of that, I want to make something that is more simple for this 45 cm aquarium. So the concept I'm going for with this aquarium is to create an aquascape that even a brand new beginner could replicate. That means that rather than going for lots of steep slopes, I will use very minimal sloping and instead focus on making the rocks themselves and where they are placed to look beautiful. Right now the soil is pretty flat, but off screen I did do some test scaping. What I quickly realized was that if I'm trying to make a scape that beginners can replicate, it would be beneficial to actually start with a slight slope off the bat because it is easier to scape that way. So for this setup, I'll change things up by adding some more soil now to keep up with the concept of beginner friendliness in mind. For this aquascape, I tried to use as little rock as I could, which including the very small rocks, turned out to be 7 pieces, which is not very much. In terms of composition, I'm going for a triangular composition, which is the easiest composition type to make in a 45 cm aquarium. I will have the high areas be in the back left corner and have the scape go down to the front right. As I'm adding soil, I am focusing on adding it towards that left corner and less towards the front right. And just like that, I am done adding the soil. Depending on the aquascape you are aiming for, it may be better to add that extra soil after putting in your rocks. This is something that you have to decide when scaping your aquarium. As I mentioned earlier, for this scape, I chose to add my extra soil in first because it is going to be easier to scape that way. Now, let's move on to what stones I will be using for this aquarium. I mentioned it in the beginning of the video, but once again, I will be returning to my roots and use Diuo stone. Diuo stone is a great stone to work with because of how unique and interesting its textures and shapes are. In my opinion, I think it's the best stone to use for an iwagumi layout. Also, the smaller the aquarium gets, the more you are going to want to use visually interesting stones, and in that sense, Diuo stone fits that bill perfectly. I know that stone choice is the same as the 60cm iwagumi layout video, but I promise that this aquascape will look quite different from that 60cm aquarium. Now I will put in my oyaishi. Directly translated, it means parent stone, but in this case, the term is used to describe the main stone of the iwagumi. For this layout, I wanted to go with a more open front area, so I will try to put my stones more towards the back areas to achieve that goal. When you first put your stones in, it will be more of a test fit, so we will go back as needed for fine adjustments to make a more balanced aquascape. Next, I'll put in my secondary stone. Now, the basic layout is done. From here, I will do some adjustments to create a more balanced aquascape and to also solidify that triangular composition that I was aiming for. To quickly remind you, the plan was to have the highest point be in the back left corner and to go down at an angle to the front right. Now, the adjustments have been completed. I had to go back and move some of the rocks around to make the composition more balanced. There weren't any major changes, but I did rotate some of the rocks to get better angles, and also adjusted how far into the soil some of the rocks were buried. I played around with how far I wanted to bury the stones, while trying to find the best face on the rocks. Face in this case meaning the side that looks the most interesting on the rocks. The last phase is the final touches. If you want to go ahead and start planting the way the layout is right now, you absolutely can. However, because of how small foreground plant roots are, I do recommend adding a powder-sized soil on top to not only make it easier to plant in, but to help those small roots get established faster. So now I will be adding some of the predecessor soil, ADA Amazonia 1. Or actually, we don't ever really call it Amazonia 1. That's my bad. So, now I will be adding the original ADA Amazonia powder type on top. I'm only going to put in enough to lightly coat the top of the Amazonia version 2. As such, you really don't need to add much of it. Around 1 or 2 centimeters should do the job. Again, adding the powder-sized substrate in the beginning helps small foreground plant roots have an easier time grabbing hold of and rooting into the soil. For this aquarium, we are using mini hairgrass, but if you want to use, let's say, dwarf baby tears, also known as HC Cuba, you will see the roots get established faster. One thing you need to be careful of is adding too much powder soil. Powder soil does break down faster than normal sized soil pellets, so if you add too much, especially to a layout with some sloping like this one, you have a risk of a landslide happening in your aquarium. Again, you only need a thin layer in order to help out your foreground plants root better. Yeah, something like this looks good, although I think I need a little more up front, because too much can cause a landslide, and too little can be difficult to plant in. In the end though, thinking that you have put in too little is usually just about right. Before we start the planting process, we first need to wet the soil using some sort of spray bottle. It is quite difficult to plant anything into bone-dry soil, so think of misting as a requirement rather than an option. You do want to mist relatively heavy so that you can be certain that the water has mixed in with the soil, which leads to easier planting. So here are the plants that I will be using for this aquascape. These are cups of ADA's Biomizu Xanomori, which is ADA's line of in vitro tissue culture plants. As I mentioned earlier in the video, we will only use mini hairgrass and dwarf hairgrass for this aquarium. If you have ever been to my store, you will know that I love to use foreground plants. But even then, it's been a while since I have done an aquascape this simple. The main plant for this aquascape is going to be the mini hairgrass, and the dwarf hairgrass will be more of the supporting act. First, you are going to clean and separate the tissue culture plants into small chunks like so. What you see here is around one tissue culture portion worth of mini hairgrass. After cleaning and separating, we will plant these using our planting tweezers. For these sorts of grassland-style aquascapes, you are better off planting somewhat randomly rather than planting very dense and evenly. The benefit of doing it like this is that you just won't need as many cups to get the results you want. It can be hard to tell because the camera is facing forward, but I am trying pretty hard to make sure that I do plant randomly. When you try to plant in a way that looks like a grid, the end growth looks extremely unnatural. So do make sure that you plant in a randomized appearance. One tip when planting foreground plants is to not plant right up to the front glass. This is so that you avoid making the front look bumpy and uneven. A major factor with having success with grassland-style aquascapes involves the amount you plant from the beginning. If you try to cheap out and not use enough foreground plants, you will see algae grow and beat, in this case, the hairgrass before getting an even carpet. If this happens, your chance of failure will increase exponentially because the algae can kill the hairgrass if it gets too established. If you plant a lot right off the bat, the chances of this happening are going to be that much lower, and you will have that beautiful carpet faster than the algae can take over. So if you have been watching closely, you will notice that the soil pellets are actually sticking to my tweezers, making it difficult for me to plant. You can see that the mini hairgrass did not want to stay in the soil this time. When this happens, it means that the soil is not wet enough, which means that I needed to spray more water. So a question that I get asked quite a lot is, how far should I plant my foreground plants? My answer to that question is, a lot deeper than you may be thinking. Reason being that if you plant too shallow, your Amano shrimps or other animals may uproot the plant before it establishes a solid root system. So if you plant deeper from the start, you are less likely to have your foreground plants get uprooted before they develop strong roots. Alright, I just finished planting most of my mini hairgrass, which means that it's now time to plant the slightly longer growing dwarf hairgrass towards the back parts of the aquascape. For the dwarf hairgrass, I want them to look as though they are coming out from behind the rocks. So in this case, I will be planting the dwarf hairgrass right behind the larger pieces of rocks in the aquascape. If I tried doing this with the mini hairgrass, you won't be able to see them at all, which is why we use dwarf hairgrass here instead of the mini. In terms of the technique to plant them, it's the exact same as the mini hairgrass. In this specific situation, I think it would be best to plant from the back to the front, rather than the same way we did with the mini hairgrass. From the back of the tank, you won't be able to see any of the bumpy or uneven growth, so there's no worries with planting up to the glass. So just like that, all of the planting is now done. When I make these setups, I always get asked by my customers, how much in plants did you use? Or I will be asked, how much in plants do I need? To answer those questions, for this aquascape I used 6 tissue culture cups of mini hairgrass and 1 tissue culture cup of dwarf hairgrass. What you see here is the perfect amount of initial planting density you want, so you run into the least amount of problems. One benefit of dense planting from the beginning is that it can prevent possible landslides in the future, which is one less thing to worry about. Now, let me show you what it looks like from above. Sorry for the shaky camera. So this is what the completed aquascape looks like from above. You may see that there are some spots in here that are looking a bit empty. That is due to me planting the hairgrass a little too deep. But as you can see, it's densely planted without overly so. This information only applies to those living in Japan, but the products I used for this aquascape, such as ADA's Bio Mizukusa no Mori mini hairgrass tissue culture plant and ADA's Duo Stone, are only obtainable through your local ADA retail shop. So if you do not have a local aquarium shop that stocks ADA products, I went ahead and looked for products online that are similar to what I used if you are interested. I've placed the links to those products in the description down below, so check it out. As well as if you are interested, I have placed a link in the description below if you would like to buy a set of these awesome stainless steel scoops for yourself. So, how was the video? In this episode, I went over creating the composition and planting process of this grassland theme aquarium. The next step that needs to be done is filling the tank with water, adding filtration, and adding a CO2 system. Then the aquarium is fully complete. If you want to keep up with how this 45cm grassland aquascape will progress, I will make a playlist for this specific aquarium, so please check back periodically for new updates. In the future, I will go over other topics related to this 45cm aquascape, such as what the maintenance looks like, and if I do run into a problem, what it is and how to fix it. If you enjoyed this first episode, please look forward to the future episodes coming soon. And if you enjoy this type of aquarium content, it would make me very happy if you could leave a like on this video and subscribe to the Wasabi Aquarium channel.